the 19th Light Dragoons. We're a unit out from the South Shore of Montreal. We actually had 3 squadrons that were here during the War of 1812. One of which stayed close to Montreal and fought there, and 2 of which were more down in this area. So we're going to be doing just some very basic cavalry demonstrations and things like that.
So we are the 19th Light Dragoons. We were the only British mounted cavalry. There were other British cavalry units, which were all provisional cavalry units, and they had horses. There were other British line cavalry units in North America, but none of them actually had horses in North America. So we were the only mounted cavalry from Britain in North America. We got here in 1813, landed in Quebec, went into Montreal. We left 1 squadron in Montreal. They defended Montreal and Quebec. And we sent 2 squadrons down into the Niagara Peninsula. So what we do is we try to portray the 19th Light Dragoons. So what they're doing right now is they're walking in file. We'd have file and column that we would usually use to walk in. And we'd usually walk 3 abreast. So we'd usually walk in file or column. Column would be more for route marches. When we were coming from Montreal all the way down into Niagara, they would have used column when they could have, because there was no roads at the time. So we would have been pretty much riding through the forest there, something very similar to that the entire way, swamps, the like. So there'd be 3 of them abreast, and that file would go back for about 30 people. Then what they would do is to switch to line. They'd have 2 lines deep, and it would go off for as many people as they have. And that's what they would do for the charge. So those lines would have about 2 horses in between them, lengthwise. And then when they charge, they draw their sabers about 100 meters from the enemy. So maybe from the posts to where you guys are sitting right now. But when they're charging, they'll go at a good gallop until they get to about where those posts are. And then at that point, they'll spur their mounts on even more, and that's when they'll draw their swords to do the contact. So, and the reason for that is they didn't want to draw their swords early, because that would warn the enemy of exactly what their intention was. Because with that distance, they could still turn off and go somewhere else and have infantry come up behind them and do a volley or whatnot. So, and you'll see that it's very difficult for them to keep exactly abreast of each other. So they'll usually have about an arm's length between them. So most of the time, if anybody here knows anything about dressage, that was actually created as a military exercise. That was created to keep the horses' heads and the horses' composure, excuse me, I'm looking for my English, that was used to keep the horses' composure so that they all looked the same in line. There was one difference that we can't do today that the British cavalry of the time would do, and that's cutting the tails. At the end of, well, about halfway up the tail, there's a little bone that comes down from the back of the horse. And there, the British used to cut the tails there. There's actual documentation of when the British were in India, the flies were so bad that the horses actually used to go lame because they were bitten by the flies so bad that they couldn't get them off them, because that tail is used to swish them away. And because they had that tendency to cut them so that they could tell their cavalry from other cavalry at a distance, because no other cavalry in the world used to cut the tails. So the generals could see that it was British cavalry rather than French cavalry from hundreds and hundreds of yards away. So you'll also notice that our riding master here, Corporal Dufour, is wearing what's called a dolman. That is our early pattern uniform. When we were in 1812 in Canada, in 1813 in December, our uniform pattern changed. That was our early pattern uniform. That's what most dragoons wore in the early part of the 18th century. In 1814, an edict came from the king, and then we started wearing this kind of a pattern uniform, where for the enlisted men it'd be clothes. but is more of a please type. And this is based off of a Polish Lancer. And it looks French. It was not well received by the troops, let's say. So we much prefer the other type. So you'll notice that Dragoon Dufour is carrying her saber at the port. So she's doing that so that you'll see some cavalrymen who will carry it on their shoulder. But what can happen is if your horse starts to buck or something, it can slide in, and you have a lot of nice arterial veins here that can get cut by a nice sharp saber. So even with our nice high collars, it can get pretty dangerous. So cavalry are always taught to hold their swords at the port. So now, that is the British way of charging into contact, is with your saber straight out to the front. You see that she holds it at the port, and when she was charging in, or walking in, she held the blade to the side with the blade out, facing out, because the back of the blade is blunt. If somebody hits the blade, it won't go in and hit the horse. And if it does hit the horse, it won't cause any damage. Nice hit.
They should look sharp.
Right there. Nice one. Very nice.
Not even sharp.
One looked out and was reaching over the fence trying to get you. Oh, that.